Charlotte. Maybe you've lived here your whole life. Maybe you moved a month ago. Our center city skyline sparkles. People take one look and label us as new, young, vibrant. It is an exciting time to live in Charlotte, but the complicated truth beyond our city's welcoming arms is we're living in one of Charlotte's deadliest years ever.
It's certainly been a violent day.
Mid-December, we're looking at 104 homicides so far in 2019.
Charlotte is now at 81 homicides for the year.
The worst number since 1993.
CMPD is investigating our city's 103rd homicide of the year.
Is this year a fluke, or is it the new normal? Tonight, we'll answer that, look where we go from here, and show you the 104 faces behind the numbers.
Good evening, I'm Molly Grantham. So often you get the rat-a-tat-tat of headlines. Breaking news, blue lights flashing, crime, crime, crime. This next hour is to take you into real life beyond those blurbs. These are the people behind this year's numbers. We want to give voices to these people behind the violence. For months, we've researched the homicides in Charlotte, and more importantly, the men, women, children, moms, dads, loved ones killed. The youngest person this year was 3 months old. The oldest was 79. We know this because we have a master list from CMPD of the homicides of 2019. It shows information on each crime, the arrests, motives, and which are considered random. We've boiled that list down. What we found may surprise you. People are dying over petty arguments. It's not because of high exotic drugs or gangs. In fact, not one homicide in Charlotte in 2019 was because of gang violence. So what are people killing each other over? We looked at all the cases, and what we found is pretty startling. Here are some examples. People have died this year over $20, over a minor car accident, over a social media post, over a fast food meal, and over an argument about a boy. Look at these people. Let it hit you. Look at Christian Estes, our city's 71st homicide. Police say he was a good kid with a loving family who was shot at a summer party. Or look at Charlotte's 16th homicide, better known to his family as Matthew Chaplin, a father. Police say a 23-year-old broke into his home while he slept and killed him in South Charlotte. In July, a man walked into this Steak and Shake and killed Darnell Harris. He was number 57, a man just trying to do his job. A stray bullet hit this beautiful single mom, Kendall Crank. She was on her way to nursing school. Tonight, we go back to talk with Kendall's mom.
She says to me, "Is that your daughter?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "She's dead." And I just collapsed.
9 months later, you can still hear the pain is raw. Riley Howell, Reed Parlier, you know those names, brave young students killed on UNC Charlotte's campus in April.
Sometimes the best that I can do is literally just get up, breathe, get up and breathe.
These people prove not every case is bad guy versus bad guy. Some are just wrong place, wrong time.
I just want us to get better, Charlotte. We just have to get better. This is too much.
This map marks every homicide in Charlotte from 2019. You'll have a hard time finding a place you haven't been to at least once. We are all affected because we all live here. It's our city, our problem.
Reed was a loving, intelligent, quiet, kind, witty, and caring soul whose life was ended by a selfish, cowardly, soulless waste of a human being.
Our mayor is livid.
We must change the path that we have taken this year. We must change that path.
Children miss their dads.
That means he's not in there. That means he's in here.
Siblings are lost.
You can't just go around killing people just because you feel like it or because you're mad.
The sheriff says he wants to help.
We don't teach conflict resolution. We don't say how to settle your differences. We need somebody to talk to kids.
Tonight, our police chief is pointing fingers.
Okay, let me just be as specific as I can. Magistrates, judges, prosecutors in particular.
And the district attorney says when they dismiss a case, it's because the evidence isn't there.
You're passionate about it.
I am. I've seen way too many families that have
literally been forgotten.
In the next hour, we're talking one-on-one with all three of those men.
As of a few weeks ago, of those killed in 2019, 76 were men and 20 were women. 76 were black, 11 were white, and 9 were Latino. Over half were millennials or even younger than millennials, kids known as Gen Z.
There is a public outcry brewing.
If my son is sitting on a slab, cold, breathless, they don't deserve to bleed. They do not deserve to breathe.
A lot of these cases are cleared by arrests. Police have made arrests in 80% of the homicides so far in 2019, and the chief will point out that is with 180 open officer positions right now. But none of those arrests brings anyone back. No one knows this better than LaToya Woodward and Mark Whiteside, one mom, one dad. I sat down with both of them separately. They don't know each other, but they're both now in a club no parent was part of.
Christian was my son. He was a great kid that lost his life early over something petty that he had nothing to do with.
LaToya Woodward is a hardworking single mom of 4. Her oldest son, Christian Estes, was killed at a college party near UNC Charlotte on Rebecca Bailey Drive this past August. Christian didn't go to UNCC. She said it was just a big summer get-together that grows as teenage parties do.
Was your son the target? The police said he wasn't. They said it was a random bystander. I think where he was shot at, it was supposed to be a gated community, but it wasn't gated. The gate was actually open because I know I went the next day and I was able to go in and out and get his vehicle.
Christian was a car guy, kept his sparkling clean, kind of like his bedroom. His clothes still in the closet, his family pictures still on the wall.
It can be you, it can be your loved one, it can be your child, because a stray bullet, it doesn't have a name on it.
Across town, Mark Whiteside feels similar pain as LaToya.
And once I walked in the door, they told me that my son Andrew had been murdered that night.
Only there is an arrest in the death of his 32-year-old son, Andrew Allen. Andrew was a boxer and wannabe musician.
I'm just following my fate.
Who was stabbed 6 times in May at a Shell gas station on the corner of South and East Boulevards in Dilworth. An argument over something dumb, Mark says.
A couple of words were said.
And the accused killer wasn't mature enough to walk away.
Not being able to say, I'm wrong and I'm sorry.
Though this father and this mother differ in having an arrest in their child's death, they are similar in how a parent feels.
Andrew was the one that was just like me.
When they suddenly miss an extension of themselves.
He was my son, but he was also like my best friend.
They're also similar in thinking the more Charlotte grows,
a bigger city like this is kind of like everybody's disconnected.
The bigger the problems we'll see.
If you could have done one thing differently, what would you have done?
With Andrew?
Yes.
I would have took him out the city. I would have raised him up in the North Carolina mountains.
One other thing. In Mark's case, someone did run to help his son, a nurse who happened to be at the gas station buying food. Mark assumes it's a woman, a guardian angel he's never met.
I would like to tell her thank you for the effort that she put forth to try to save his life.
You just heard Mark mention wanting to meet the nurse that tried to save his son. With some digging and the help of Facebook, we tracked that nurse down and reunited them last week. The nurse, a 28-year-old named Andrew Noel, started what turned into a 22-second bear hug. When they broke, Mark asked his name.
Your name and Andrew?
Yes, sir.
Oh my gosh.
From one to another.
From there, they sat and had a 45-minute conversation. We have more on their reunion on our website now, WBTV.com. A little bit of humanity there. Those men say they are going to stay in touch. The fact all these numbers are people is something our leaders say they take home with them every single night. For this special, we sat down with the police chief, with the district attorney, and with the sheriff of Mecklenburg County, who used to be a homicide detective here years ago. We had long conversations, and that level of frustration for all 3 of those men with our homicide rate this year is high.
Well, Charlotte has never tackled conflict. We never tackled hate. We never tackle racism. We never tackle bigotry or none of that. And so all of that has filtered into the minds of our citizens. And along driving all of this is social media. Anything happens, you play it over and over and over. Or if you want to look at it, it's over and over and over. And so we haven't never sit down and said, what is the cause?
But we could go into South Charlotte right now and go into a neighborhood and they would say, oh, this doesn't really impact me. That's just bad guys shooting bad guys. That's not always the case.
Go to the mall. And at the mall, if something happens in a parking lot at the mall, that just doesn't affect someone who actually lives in an enclave of South Charlotte, because at some point they've got to go somewhere to interact with people, and when they do, crime will come to them. And people are like, well, why didn't we do something? Well, I'm telling you that sense of desperation will ultimately, it may not connect with you today, it may not connect with you tomorrow, but someday that will land on your front door.
If we're not serious about repeat offenders, then this is what we're going to get. I think the numbers speak for themselves. If there's a high likelihood that me carrying a concealed weapon, nothing's going to happen to me, I'm going to continue to do so. So we got to get serious about it, especially with those repeat violent offenders, because if you've shown a propensity for violence and now you're armed, it doesn't take a rocket scientist working at NASA to understand there are going to be tragic consequences from that. That's a recipe for disaster.
Do you think Mecklenburg County is lenient on repeat offenders?
I think a lot of counties are. I think we are.
That concept of repeat offenders is something we all hear all the time, for good reason. 65% of people charged in homicides in 2019 in Charlotte have had previous violent criminal charges or arrests in Mecklenburg County.
Those leaders talked with us about what they see most, why petty arguments spiral into killings. Some of it's probably obvious.
They keep letting the repeat offenders out. You're letting people out with violent crimes.
But the others might grab your attention.
As a parent, who do you put the blame on? Do you blame the parents, or do you blame society?
That's next on Voices Behind the Violence, a WBTV special report. So what three things are behind petty arguments turning to killings? One of them that may catch the most headlines: juveniles, kids with guns. A 17-year-old is one of the three people charged with killing Kendall Crank, a single mom whose death grabbed many of us this year.
She was sitting at a traffic light on the way to nursing school and died because of a shootout in a parking lot. A stray bullet hit her car. A woman going to school to save lives, but nobody was able to save hers. We reached out to Kendall's mom to see if we could talk with her about her daughter. And that's when, in true motherly fashion, she invited us into her home for breakfast. Our Sharon Hayes got a chance to sit around the table with this family, who is still really feeling the loss 9 months later.
Take the biscuits out.
Linda Springs is a mom.
We're gonna go simple.
She cooks.
I don't like them too salty.
She teaches.
And plus, onions are good for you, especially for colds.
And she will lift your spirits.
You want to try this?
I'll try it. Linda says she can't help but be a mother now, even after her youngest and only daughter was taken away.
You know, I always tell God, I say, you say the best for last. Because I always wanted a little girl, and you know, she was a joy.
Linda says 27-year-old Kendall had a heart for seeing the very best in people.
That was one of our battles, because she gave everyone the benefit of the doubt. She'll say, but Mom, maybe she didn't deserve that, or maybe, and I'll be like, no. She embraced people, and she believed that people could change, or people could be better.
Linda tries hard to remember that perspective, especially now. A stray bullet hit Kendall as she drove on North Tryon Street after a hair appointment back on March 28th.
She was on her way to school, and she didn't make it.
The past 9 months haven't been easy for Linda or her husband, Donald, Kendall's stepfather.
There have to be some kind of laws put in place that if you under the age, or if you use a gun illegal like that, you have to pay a stiff penalty. That's the only way I look at it.
Linda says waiting for a trial isn't hard, but the silence is. It used to be a happy, loud home. With Kendall gone, her 2 children now live with their father. Their absence makes the quiet in these rooms sound heavy.
Like, what is the biggest thing that is different?
This is so funny, because I don't hear the yelling anymore, or the you know, the noise of the the baby's feet pitty-patty all over the house. We have dinosaurs.
There are memories of dinosaurs Kendall's youngest son loved, awards her oldest daughter won, and, of course, pictures of vibrant Kendall who tied them all together.
It's supposed to be your child bury you.
Anybody who walks in this home will feel Linda's open arms and desire to care for others, as a mother does. And that's what she wants you to remember about Kendall. Not that she was the 27th homicide for Charlotte in 2019, but that she was Kendall Crank, a beautiful daughter, mom, and student who even taught her mom how to see the light in the dark moments.
Maybe I should try to look beyond the outside, like she did. I try to think of the good things about her that keeps me going.
Sharon Hayes, WBTV, on your side.
Linda Crank met with the district attorney and said they're making slow progress on her daughter's case. She said it could take 2 more years to finish. Another one of the reasons is repeat offenders, and it's probably the one you've heard the most about this year. You don't have to go far to find an example. Charlotte's 97th homicide last month is a woman better known as Ebony Harrison. The man arrested for her killing got out of jail 3 days before the shooting. Our Alex Giles spoke with Ebony's sister.
At a November vigil, you could hear the pain and anguish coming from Ebony Harrison's loved ones. Family members tell me Harrison loved to tell jokes and dance, but now she's gone. These gatherings have become an all too familiar sight in Charlotte. Darkness and sadness, a collective mourning of a lost loved one. Ebony Harrison, another Charlottean cut down by violence. Police believe she was shot and killed on Reagan Drive in North Charlotte.
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it.
The man charged for Harrison's killing, Corey Vega, just 23 years old. He is no stranger to the Mecklenburg County Jail. Vega has been arrested multiple times in the last few years. Online records from the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office show Vega was booked into jail on October 23rd. He was charged with robbery with a dangerous weapon, conspiracy to commit robbery with a dangerous weapon, and possession of a firearm by felon. Records show he was released from jail November 14th, just 3 days before he allegedly shot and killed Ebony Harrison. I spoke with Harrison's sister, Tequila Sanders.
He got locked up sometime in October. He was released November 14th, November 17th. He shot and killed my sister.
That's the allegation. When I asked Sanders what she would like to say to Corey Vega, she gave her comments deep thought.
What would be your message to this man?
It's hard. I really feel sorry for him. I don't know that young man's background. I don't know his upbringing. I really don't know nothing about him.
What she does know is that Vega is in jail now and has been in jail before, charged for other violent crimes. She tells me she's upset this man was able to get out of jail before the incident involving her sister.
They keep letting the repeat offenders out. You're letting people out with violent crimes. They're coming out, it's like a spit in the judicial system's face.
Reporting in Charlotte, Alex Giles, WBTV, on your side.
Now, the third thing behind the petty arguments turning to killings, we mentioned this, marijuana. We know it's on our streets. Some say it's harmless, a victimless crime. Chief Putney told us he's tired of hearing that.
People assume it's some high-level exotic drug market where people are getting violently killed, and it's not.
Well, if people were to listen and seek facts, they would know the truth, which is small amounts of marijuana is costing us lives.
Roughly 15% of this year's homicides are classified as drug-related. However, in many other killings, domestic violence-related killings, fights that escalated, or armed robberies, police say marijuana was present. Community members are working long days and even long weeks to make sure families aren't alone.
We are trying to alleviate a little bit of the pain and a little bit of the stress and grief that families are going through in their time of loss.
They are not the only ones overworked.
So that means if you get called in at midnight and that case takes you 12, 24 hours, our detectives are working continuously until there's nothing left to do.
The toll it takes on homicide detectives, next on Voices Behind the Violence. Right now, you're looking at something we've all seen. Candles, tears, pictures, and frames. This vigil was in Camp Green in West Charlotte months ago. The raw truth is there are so many vigils like this, it can be overwhelming. This year, as numbers continue to grow, organizations have tried hard to turn the pain into purpose. Our WBTV's Dedrick Russell talks with one mother who said support from the community is what has kept her going.
The date was May 1st, 2019.
I never, ever would imagine a world without Donquavius.
Donquavius Davis was Charlotte's 42nd homicide this year.
He's just very generous.
His mother, Claudia Davis, describes the moments before she found out her son got shot.
That day, and it was weird because I was going to go to bed early because I just felt something just leave my body. I just had a moment of instant weakness. Not 10 minutes before I lay down, I got a phone call. When I went into the hospital, and when I said his name, and it was taking me, and I heard the nurse say, and she just yelled it, was he 22? And when I heard was, I said, wait a minute, what do you mean was?
Quickly, a whole community surrounded Davis and her family. Mothers of Murdered Offspring, known as MOMO, was founded in Charlotte in 1993.
We are trying to alleviate a little bit of the pain and a little bit of the stress and grief that families are going through in their time of loss.
MOMO conducts vigils for murdered victims' families and encourages counseling. Harrison says the vigil for Davis's son, Donquavius, stood out.
I remember having a conversation with his mother during the candlelight, and she was very, very strong at first. And then all of a sudden, she just broke down in tears and just said, I can't do this alone. And then a crowd of her family members, kind of hovered around her.
It was a great comfort, just being shown compassion, just anybody to be able to show you that they care any way they can, it helps.
Sometimes just a good cry, a good hug, a good listen is sometimes all people really do need.
The visuals for this year?
We've been busy. We have had at least sometimes 3 candlelights in a week.
Both mother and MOMO want to know when the killings will stop. Davis is now left to follow the judicial system to see if justice will be done involving her son's murder. The mother now wants to connect with other grieving family members to make a difference.
We're not biological blood related, but the blood shed makes us family now.
Turning pain into purpose is now the focus. This mother says that will be hard, but she is doing it for her murdered son.
No, I'm thankful that morning he did text me, love you, Ma.
In Charlotte, Dedrick Russell, WBTV, on your side.
Once the case is cleared, if a gun is used, it's supposed to go back into the street, into the marketplace. But we've learned that isn't happening. Why CMPD says it hasn't released 18,000 guns it now has in Uptown's headquarters.
You're looking at the faces of the over 100 people violently killed by someone else in 2019 in Mecklenburg County. We are in the midst of Charlotte's deadliest year since 1993. Welcome back. I'm Molly Grantham. You're watching WBTV News' special report, Voices Behind the Violence. Let's review what our research so far has shown. People in Charlotte died this year mostly because of petty arguments. Police say the problem is kids with guns, repeat offenders, and marijuana. People are killing over weed. Not one 2019 homicide in our city is classified as gang-related. And that's not all. Here's something you've never heard reported in Charlotte. We uncovered it by going through state law. Every gun confiscated from a crime since 2013 is being stored right now at CMPD headquarters. 18,000 firearms, sawed-off shotguns, homemade pistols, handguns, all sitting right now at CMPD. Why? It's a good question. WBTV's Alex Giles has the answer He got invited into a room most people in Charlotte don't even know exists.
Molly, the room police gave me access to is several floors away from the conference room and police headquarters where I'm standing right now. And in that room are rows and rows of firearms tucked away behind glass cases for safekeeping. The police chief says he has a, quote, law enforcement reason for doing this. And he maintains that he's not breaking the law in doing this. He is keeping these firearms off the streets. Nestled in CMPD headquarters behind closed doors sits a collection of guns. Lots and lots of guns. Small guns, long guns, black guns, silver guns. All of these have been taken off the street for one reason or another. This room full of close to 700 guns is just a small percentage of the 18,000 guns CMPD has in the building. And if the firearms are no longer needed for trial or an investigation and they don't have a rightful law-abiding owner to be returned to, they sit in rooms like this one, not doing anything, but not posing a threat either. It doesn't have to be this way. In fact, North Carolina has a disposition of firearms law entirely for this reason. The legislation gives police options for what they can do. It states the gun can be destroyed, but only if the weapon is unsafe to use or it doesn't have an identification number. They can be kept for training or experimental purposes or donated to a museum. Otherwise,
the law is pretty clear. They want vendors to be able to resell guns. I think it's wrong-headed. I'm never going to break the law, but I am going to say we have a law enforcement reason where we shouldn't be adding more weapons to the hands of young people.
The police chief repeatedly cited a law enforcement reason for keeping them here.
And you say you don't want to break the law, but isn't that breaking the law to not put them back in?
There's a law enforcement reason why I'm not putting them out there. Mainly it is to make sure our people are trained and understand what they're dealing with when they encounter weapons, and because I think it's a public safety hazard to keep putting more and more guns that we're seizing, that have many of which were illegal, that we're seizing and then turning them back and reselling them.
For decades, the folks at Hyatt Gun Shop in Charlotte have been selling all sorts of firearms. The owner tells me he's purchased guns from law enforcement agencies, and he sees how some might like this law while others don't.
On the one hand, you've got some valuable collector and historical guns that sit in the police department. You'd hate to see them just melted and ruined, and the money lost and the history lost. On the other hand, the politicians are so worried that if one gun is resold and used in a crime, it could come back to haunt them and make them look bad.
That scenario right there is what the police chief told us he's trying to avoid.
I don't want to be responsible for having one of those weapons take a life here in Charlotte when we could have done something that's within our purview because of a law enforcement reason to keep that from happening, and that's what I stand by.
Again, police tell me that the vast majority of the firearms that they have confiscated, like the ones you just saw in that room, are stolen. That's why they are encouraging gun owners to please be responsible, keep your guns locked away safely. Molly?
We look to see if other states have a similar law and have highlighted those who do on this map. This information was provided to us by the National Rifle Association. The chief made waves last Friday when he announced he's ending part of the department's ankle monitoring program. Police will no longer track people accused of murder let out on an ankle bracelet. In that news conference, he said the department monitors 463 people total with electronic monitoring. 31 of those accused criminals, he said, face murder charges.
From now on, they're going to either have to be held in jail or the judge is going to let them out. But we can't, in good faith, allow for our people to monitor people who are charged with murder.
You've heard Chief Putney criticize about repeat offenders getting low bond amounts. Our Paige Peroso took that criticism and one specific case to Mecklenburg County District Court Judge Elizabeth Trosh.
One of the men, both charged with first-degree murder, one of the men had a $750,000 bond, and the other had a $50,000 bond.
I think your example just demonstrates how irrational this money bail system is.
Judge Trosh says she thinks a better system is the release or preventative detention model. That model is used in some state courts, and she said it would keep people in jail if it's not in the best interest to put them back out in society. That's why back in May, CMS and CMPD started partnering up. Together, they thought they could try to stop the pattern of violence earlier before kids get into the adult world. It makes sense, especially when you see who is being charged with murder this year. About 60% of those people arrested are under the age of 24. So we asked the schools, what are they really doing? We sent our Chandler Morgan to investigate.
So the question becomes, when you find yourself in a conflict, do you manage the conflict or do you allow the conflict to manage you?
We've seen it happen multiple times this year. Things get heated and a young adult pulls out a gun to try and solve the problem. And the damage done runs deep, cutting too many young lives short.
It literally ruins the life of the person that you've killed, but it also ruins your life and possibly your family's life.
One of the things that you see is at least 10% of these homicide cases involve a victim that was someone who was under the age of 18, or somebody on the other side of that gun pulling the trigger who is a young adult.
We have a problem, and we have to look at that problem and not just depend on just the police to handle it.
That's why Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools have teamed up with police in Charlotte's community relations.
Or what differences have been trying to be made with this partnership of the community of Charlotte, policing in Charlotte, and our schools.
We're working with them to help build self-esteem, to take the necessary steps to become productive members of the community when they become young adults.
That's the long-term goal, but short-term, it also means physically getting into schools face-to-face with students.
We teach conflict resolution. I think in the long run, they recognize that I have some tools that are available to me. So shooting someone or killing someone is a conflict resolution skill.
We told you about these efforts being made back in May when former CMS Superintendent Clayton Wilcox was in charge, but now the district's in the hands of Superintendent Ernest Winston. We asked him if he's concerned with the high amount of young adults involved in deadly crimes this year.
It is concerning, and in a broader sense, whenever we lose a young person or any member of our community, that's something that affects all of us.
Winston says the efforts CMS has made to try and deter students and young adults from crime.
Obviously, with the rising homicide rate in our community, those things have not been as effective as we would like, and so it's incumbent upon us to think about other ways that we can expand that partnership.
Winston thinks one of the ways they can tap into young adults, keeping them out of a life of crime, is by adding more counselors into schools. Chandler Morgan, WBTV, on your side.
There's a look at what schools are trying to do to keep kids in classrooms and not prison. But that's not the only effort. We're 10 days into a new law deemed Raise the Age. It changed at what age teens can be tried as adults. Lawmakers raised the age to 18 years old. But what happens if a 16 or 17-year-old is now charged with murder? After all, it did happen just a few months ago. A 16-year-old is charged in one of the most high-profile cases in Charlotte this year. Police say Rakeem Shacklett shot and killed a 74-year-old businessman, Dr. John Holliday, in Uptown. What does the law say about teens accused of violent crimes like the one in his death? Anchor Jamie Bull is back in our studio to explain Raise the Age.
Molly, North Carolina was the last state in the country to implement Raise the Age. It mandates that 16 and 17-year-olds who commit crimes will no longer automatically be charged as adults. Think about it this way. According to Raise the Age North Carolina, in 2014, only 3% of crimes committed by 16 and 17-year-olds were violent felonies. 80% were misdemeanors, things like disorderly conduct or possession of marijuana. And 16% were nonviolent felonies like driving under the influence or burglary. But no matter the crime, all those teens were tried and punished as adults. And here's why that's important. Generally, the juvenile court system focuses more on rehabilitation and offers more options to keep a teen out of jail or prison and in the community doing counseling. The adult system more focused on punishment and time behind bars. So a teen who is tried and punished as an adult now has a record and a punishment, and that can start a vicious cycle. It can cut off their path to college, a job, or perhaps even stable housing down the road. Now, this isn't a free pass, no matter the crime, though. Keep that in mind. Under the new law, a prosecutor can still push to try a teen as an adult if the crime is serious enough. But again, they aren't automatically charged as an adult. On the flip side of this, some critics are worried this will lead to an influx of teens in the juvenile court system. And there's really no disputing it. The Council for Children's Rights says there will be 2,000 more young people in the system. The Juvenile Justice Advisory Committee said that's going to cost around $60 million to put programs into place to mentor and help kids who have been charged get onto the right path. But it's money that isn't going toward housing kids in prison. DAs across the state say they have had enough time to prepare and get counselors hired. Molly, back to you.
Jamie, thank you. And we want to emphasize the one point that you just made. Raise the age will not put teens accused of violent crimes like rape or murder back on the streets. That's straight from the DA's office. They say teenagers accused of those types of violent crimes will immediately be sent to adult court. Next, at this point, you know 1993 was the most violent year ever in Charlotte. Are the same issues still issues? Is history repeating itself? We get perspective from two men who were very close to the killings back then. Coming up next. Most of you have probably experienced the feeling of being overworked. For detectives who have the responsibility to find accused killers, they say that weight can be really tough. Tonight, in a twist on how we look at murders, our Paige Peroso is taking us through the eyes of law enforcement.
For the men and women of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, the increase in violence isn't something they can just turn off on their TV. These crime scenes are their offices, and they live through the effects of the violence just like the victims and the victims' families. When homicide detectives walk into their office, they walk past a list of the homicide victims from 2019.
It just seems like this year has just been one murder after another.
Lieutenant Brian Crum oversees the Violent Crime Division, which includes the homicide unit. He says this year's violence, especially amongst young people, is troubling.
Violence, it's hard to try to understand and wrap your head around what we're seeing in the community.
Is it frustrating not to have an answer?
Yeah, it is.
And as the homicide number goes up, it bears a heavy weight on officers who are fighting this crime.
So often we get stuck on the number, 96, 97, and a lot of times what gets lost is that every time we add one number to that count, that's another victim that's lost to the community.
When someone is killed in the city of Charlotte, the homicide unit responds to those scenes and starts their investigation.
The first 48 is kind of the thing that everybody knows about, right? Because that's what's in the media very popularly, but our detectives keep going until there's nothing left.
The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department is proud of their solve rate. They say they consistently perform above the national average, but there are still open cases.
As a lieutenant over this case, I'm sure you're speaking with these families often. What are those conversations like when cases might not be solved yet and they are looking for answers?
It's hard. They would be upset with me one day, very angry one day, and I understand that they're not necessarily angry at me, they're angry because they want answers. And then there's other days that, that they would just cry with me. And so you really get to build that bond.
Seems like a part cop, part therapist in some ways.
Some days it really is, and there's a therapy in it for us as well, because there's times that we go through that roller coaster of emotions with them too.
That roller coaster includes the investigation, but also the process through the judicial system and hopefully a conviction at the end. Paige Peroso, WBTV, on your side.
It'd be unfair of us to just look at the law enforcement side of this. Once an arrest is made in a case, that case goes to the district attorney's office. There are 10 people on the team that investigates homicides in the Mecklenburg County DA office. Each assistant district attorney on that team currently has between 15 and 20 cases. The process of those cases can be complicated. The head of that unit walked us through the office to explain why.
But not every case is perfect. And so what we do is look at the evidence that we have. We look at what the best possible result would be at trial, what the worst possible result would be at trial, what the likely result would be at trial, and then we figure out what a reasonable plea offer would be to make in that particular case.
Are you always trying to find a plea offer?
There's almost no case that we wouldn't make a reasonable plea offer in, and that's because no case is perfect.
All that work ends here. From the street to the homicide detective to a case file for an assistant DA, it ends here at a round table in the district attorney office in Uptown. We were granted exclusive access to the discussion that takes place before a plea deal is offered. Intent, evidence, case details, the brutal nature of the crime. All of that is laid out on the table. CMPD, prosecutors, they're all represented. And after hours of discussion, a decision is made. All of that for one case. If the defendant doesn't accept that plea offer, the case will then go to trial. But the DA's office says that scheduling a trial can be tough because there's limited courtrooms. That's why some cases take years. You know this is the deadliest year in Charlotte since 1993, but the reasons why that we've been discussing the past hour are completely different from what was going on in our city in the 90s. Back then, now Sheriff Gary McFadden was a homicide detective. He had a frontline seat to the violence as he investigated and arrested people in murders. We asked him for a comparison.
It was shooting in crack houses. They were shooting at parties. Everybody knew that you were going to deliver this dope or deliver the drugs, and they knew you were coming. Drug dealers set up other drug dealers. Drug dealers robbed drug dealers. The guys on the street robbed drug dealers, so we had it all. You know, if you were out and they didn't have your money, they would snatch your bag, you would fight, they would shoot you.
Also here in 1993 was WBTV veteran reporter Steve Crump. Steve says he remembers his crime reports from the 90s like they were yesterday. He sat down with anchor Maureen O'Boyle to give perspective on our city then to what our city is experiencing now.
Steve, you were on the beat, crime beat, in 93, the deadliest year on record. Did you ever think we would see these kind of numbers again?
No, not in 10 years, not in 20 years. And the interesting thing about 1993 in particular, when we hit that 100 number, we knew something was up. And then it kept going. And then, you know, when we hit the 120 mark, I remember being in the newsroom that morning and everybody was frenzied. You know, it was like, Charlotte, really? We're putting up those kinds of homicide numbers? And when you kind of get into the metrics of those particular homicides, you have to look at what some of the overwhelming conditions happen to be in our community.
And those conditions were poverty, pockets, and it wasn't regentrified, right?
Well, pockets of poverty being one part of it, but you were also still dealing with the crack cocaine epidemic. And you had people, as far as drugs and turf wars.
So you were there in 93, you're here in 2019. Is this just a fluke, or should we get used to this? Is this the new normal?
I don't know if you can call it the new normal. I think that people tolerate it. The question in my mind is that everything has a breaking point. What will this community's breaking point be? I mean, you know, you hear some things about Charlotte in terms of being a desirable place to live, and maybe in some pockets, you know, you still have that feeling of Mayberry. But how does this town, if it can, and it's the genie out of the bottle that you can't put back, but how does this community reclaim its innocence? How does this city that we love maintain its stability? And as much as you can have all the institutional programs to create jobs and find affordable housing and those kinds of amenities, a lot of it starts with the individual.
Another thing both Sheriff McFadden and Steve brought up was that back in 93, crime was in very specific parts of Mecklenburg County, and today in 2019, murders are happening all across the county.
Next is your chance. We're going to end the night with how you can have your voice heard so we can hopefully prevent this spike in violence again.
We've laid out the issues here in Charlotte. We've given you the facts and also shown you the faces behind the problem. Is our homicide rate a fluke, or is it the new normal? Every single official we talked with had a different answer to that question, but all agreed that if we don't start talking about it as a city, it will not get fixed. So that's what we're doing. We're talking about it. And now we want to hear from you. Go to the WBTV News Facebook page. We have pinned a place for you to tell us what you think. What suggestions do you have on handling our high murder rate? Or be honest, do you even care? We hope you do. We hope you have ideas you'd like us to take to city leaders. Or maybe you have words for the families who bravely opened up tonight. Please let us know. This is your sounding board. Use it. Again, WBTV News Facebook page. We will be reading all of your comments and we will take them to the leaders who run our city. I'm Molly Grantham. On behalf of WBTV News, thank you. We're going to leave you with what we find most important, the people. Good night.